The shuttle's descent sequence initiated with a metallic groan as the atmospheric shields engaged. Dr. Mara Kowalski gripped the worn leather strap above her head. A relic from Earth she insisted on bringing, despite the sophisticated safety protocols of interstellar vessels. Old habits from field expeditions died hard. Through the viewport, Kepler 442c revealed itself, an endless expanse of crystalline white, refracting the light of its distant sun into prismatic patterns that might have been beautiful, if not for their deadly implications. The salt plains. 300 cycles ago, the initial planetary survey had declared this world barren, a conclusion reinforced by 47 species across 17 star systems. The scientific consensus was absolute. Nothing could survive in those hypersaline conditions. Final approach to descent coordinates, announced the shuttle's AI. Advisory: surface conditions exceed recommended parameters for biological research. Mara snorted. When have I ever stayed within recommended parameters? The craft shuddered as it penetrated the upper atmosphere, and Mara watched the orbital research station Gamma 7 shrink to a glinting speck above. She remembered the faces of the xenobiological research team, the skepticism, the thinly veiled contempt when she presented her hypothesis. Only Dr. Thrum, the Delphinus scientist with his oscillating breathing chambers, had shown genuine curiosity rather than dismissal. Your theory lacks fundamental evidence, Dr. Zylov Vixarian had said, his translucent cranial ridges pulsing with what Mara recognized as academic disdain. 47 species have analyzed the chemical composition of those salt flats. The concentration exceeds toxicity thresholds for all known carbon-based life. There is no biological activity. Perhaps, Mara had replied, we've been looking for the wrong signs. The landing thrusters fired, casting swirling eddies of salt crystals around the descending craft. Mara's equipment rattled in their makeshift housing compartments, custom-built devices that her colleagues had dismissed as primitive and unnecessarily analog. But Mara believed in redundancy, in systems resistant to the electromagnetic anomalies that had plagued previous expeditions. Where others saw equipment failure, she suspected interference. With a resonant thud that vibrated through her bones, the shuttle touched down. Mara began the methodical process of suiting up. Her exosuit was a patchwork of standard-issue components and modifications she'd designed herself. The real marvel was the integrated sensing apparatus, capable of detecting minute electrical potential differentials and subtle changes in crystalline structures that standard scanners overlooked. Surface ambient temperature, 57.3 degrees Celsius. Atmospheric composition, unsafe for unprotected exposure. Salinity readings, off-scale high. The AI's voice contained a hint of disapproval. Dr. Kowalski, Gamma 7 requests confirmation of your exit timeline. Tell them standard protocol. 72-hour maximum surface expedition. Regular check-ins every 6 hours. Mara secured her helmet, watching the environmental seals activate with a satisfying green glow. And remind them I won't tolerate remote cancellation of my mission this time. The airlock cycled, and the ramp extended downward. Mara took her first steps onto the surface of Kepler 442c. The salt crunched beneath her boots, forming perfect hexagonal patterns in her wake. The horizon stretched endlessly white in all directions, broken only by occasional crystalline formations that rose like abstract sculptures. The sun hung low, casting long shadows that seemed to move with an uncanny rhythm if observed too long. Mara activated her scanning equipment, methodically deploying the sensor array in a radial pattern around the shuttle. The initial readings were consistent with previous surveys: extreme salinity, trace elements of potassium and magnesium, minimal moisture despite the periodic ionic storms that swept the planet. But then, as she extended the range of her electromagnetic detectors, something anomalous appeared on her readouts: a faint pulse, barely distinguishable from background radiation, but with a distinct pattern, 3 rapid oscillations followed by a longer sustain, then repetition at irregular intervals. Initial readings logged, she spoke into her helmet recorder, detecting unusual electromagnetic signature at bearing 047. Signal strength insufficient for standard equipment to register. But my modified sensors show clear evidence of non-random patterning. Mara oriented herself toward the signal and began walking. Each step left a temporary depression in the salt surface that gradually refilled itself, as if the ground were a viscous liquid, slowly returning to equilibrium. She noted this behavior with increasing interest. Standard crystalline structures didn't self-organize with such fluidity. After 20 minutes of careful progress, she reached a formation that rose approximately 2 meters from the surrounding plane. Unlike the jagged, random structures she'd passed, this one exhibited unusual symmetry, concentric hexagonal layers that spiraled upward. At its base, the salt crystals appeared to be vibrating at a frequency just below visible shimmer. Mara knelt, unclipping a specialized sampling device from her belt. Subject appears to exhibit properties inconsistent with non-biological crystal formation, she recorded. Deploying microprobe for structural analysis. The probe penetrated the crystalline surface with surprising resistance, as if the structure were actively opposing the intrusion. When withdrawn, the sample contained within revealed something extraordinary under her portable microscope. Microscopic chambers arranged in lattice-like patterns, connected by filaments thinner than a human hair. Structural organization suggests pressure adaptation, she whispered, the excitement evident in her voice despite her attempts at clinical detachment. These aren't random formations. They're pressure chambers, possibly cellular analogs adapted for hypersaline conditions. As she collected additional samples, her electromagnetic detector began registering stronger signals, pulses that now clearly originated from beneath the salt crust. More concerning, her communications link to the shuttle suddenly degraded, filled with static that pulsed in rhythm with the signals. Fascinating, Mara muttered. The electromagnetic interference increases proportionally to my investigative activity, almost as if something is responding to my presence. That first expedition day yielded more questions than answers. But as Mara returned to the shuttle with her samples, she felt the familiar rush of scientific discovery, the thrill that came with challenging established knowledge. In her small onboard lab, she began processing the samples, running analyses that would have been considered redundant by her orbital colleagues. The results defied conventional understanding. The salt crystals contained microscopic structures with membrane-like boundaries that separated internal chemistry from the hostile external environment. These membranes appeared to harness the planet's extreme temperature gradient to generate energy, creating microscopic ionic batteries that powered rudimentary biological processes. Life, she whispered to the empty cabin. But not as we know it. Her scheduled communication with Gamma-7 was met with predictable skepticism. Your readings are likely contamination from your own equipment. Dr. Vexarian's voice crackled through the comm system. The electromagnetic anomalies have been documented before. They're the result of solar interaction with the salt flats. With respect, Doctor, Mara replied, struggling to keep her tone measured. Standard explanations don't account for the patterns I'm observing. These signals exhibit clear, non-random sequencing consistent with information transfer. Information transfer requires a sender and receiver, Dr. Vexarian countered. You're suggesting sentience where none can exist. I'm suggesting we don't understand everything about how life can manifest, Mara insisted. The samples show organized structures capable of energy production and consumption. By any definition, that's a biological process. Send your data, interjected Dr. Thrum, the Delphinus scientist. His resonant voice carried a harmonious overlay that indicated interest rather than dismissal. We should analyze before concluding. The transmission ended with promises to review her findings. But Mara knew the orbital team would find reasons to discount her evidence. She needed something more compelling, something undeniable. On the second day, she ventured farther from the shuttle, following the strengthening electromagnetic signals to a vast depression in the salt plain. Here, the crystals formed intricate spiraling patterns that radiated outward like a massive circuit board. At the center stood a formation unlike any she'd seen, a towering spire that pulsed with subtle luminescence in perfect harmony with the electromagnetic readings. Mara approached cautiously, her instruments recording unprecedented levels of activity. The ground beneath her feet seemed to respond to her presence, subtle depressions forming and reforming with each step, as if the entire plane were a semi-solid medium rather than crystalline matter. "The entire structure appears to function as a cohesive system," she recorded, circling the central formation. "There's evidence of information processing, stimulus, and response patterns that suggest rudimentary decision-making capabilities." As she extended a sampling tool toward the central spire, a surge of electromagnetic energy caused her instruments to temporarily malfunction. When they reactivated, the signals had changed, faster, more complex, and propagating outward from her position across the plane. "It's communicating," she realized with growing excitement. Or at least, reacting to external stimuli in a coordinated manner. She spent hours documenting the phenomenon, collecting samples from different formations and measuring the varying electromagnetic responses. Each interaction yielded new patterns, suggesting a complex ecosystem hidden within what appeared to be a lifeless landscape. When she finally returned to the shuttle for her scheduled communication with Gamma 7, she faced immediate skepticism. "Your instruments are clearly malfunctioning," Dr. Vexarian insisted, after reviewing her transmitted data. "These readings contradict every established principle of xenobiology." "That's precisely my point," Mara countered. "We've been applying carbon-based assumptions to environments that might support entirely different biological paradigms." "Speculative at best," another researcher interjected. "You're seeing patterns because you want to see them." Only Dr. Thrum seemed genuinely intrigued. "The electromagnetic patterns do show non-random sequencing," the Delphinus scientist noted. "And these microscopic structures, they bear resemblance to the crystalline proto-organisms discovered in the methane seas of Epsilon Eridani b." "Thank you, Dr. Thrum," Mara said, grateful for even this measured support. "I believe what we're observing is not just microbial life, but evidence of a complex ecosystem with potential for higher-order organisms." The statement was met with derisive laughter from several researchers. "Higher-order organisms? In a salt desert?" Dr. Vexarian's voice dripped with condescension. "Dr. Kowalski, your enthusiasm is admirable, but you're venturing into fantasy." Mara ended the communication, feeling frustrated but undeterred. She knew she needed irrefutable evidence, something that would shake the scientific community to its foundations. That opportunity came on the third day. She awoke to discover her shuttle's external sensors reporting massive electromagnetic disturbances, pulses that swept across the salt plains in coordinated waves. The patterns had changed overnight, becoming more focused, more deliberate. According to her instruments, the epicenter of this activity was moving, traveling across the plain toward her landing site. "Subject appears mobile," she recorded, her voice tight with excitement. Electromagnetic signature suggests a unified entity, approximately 30 meters in diameter, advancing at 2.7 kilometers per hour. Mara quickly donned her exosuit and exited the shuttle, deploying additional sensing equipment in a defensive perimeter. The approaching entity left no visible trail in the salt, yet her instruments clearly tracked its movement, a contradiction that suggested capabilities beyond simple physical locomotion. She stood facing the direction of the approaching signature, her heart pounding in her chest. This was the moment that would either validate her theories or expose them as delusion. The electromagnetic readings peaked, then stabilized. According to her instruments, The entity had stopped less than 50 meters from her position. Yet visually, there was nothing there, only the endless salt plain stretching to the horizon. Mara took a deliberate step forward. The readings fluctuated in response. "I know you're there," she said aloud, feeling slightly foolish despite her scientific conviction. "You're manipulating electromagnetic fields to conceal your physical presence." The response was immediate, a surge of energy that momentarily overloaded her instruments. When they recalibrated, the pattern had changed again, becoming more complex, more structured. "You're communicating," Mara realized. "Or trying to." She activated a specialized device she'd brought from Earth, a prototype electromagnetic pulse generator designed to mimic the pattern she'd observed. Carefully, she reproduced the initial sequence she'd detected: 3 rapid pulses, 1 sustained. The response was dramatic. The salt plain before her began to shimmer, crystals realigning themselves in flowing patterns that defied natural formation. And then, gradually, something began to take shape, a massive form emerging not by appearing, but by revealing what had been there all along. Mara gasped as the creature fully materialized. Stretching nearly 12 meters in length, it resembled nothing so much as a titanic arthropod composed entirely of crystalline structures. Multiple segmented limbs supported a body that seemed to flow between solid and semi-liquid states. Where a head might be expected, a complex arrangement of sensory appendages radiated outward, constantly sampling the environment through means she could only guess at. "Remarkable camouflage," she whispered into her recorder. "Subject appears capable of manipulating electromagnetic fields to bend light around its structure, rendering it effectively invisible to conventional observation." The creature, she mentally dubbed it a halite, after the mineral form of salt, remained motionless, its sensory apparatus oriented toward her. Mara stood her ground, fighting the instinctive fear that threatened to overwhelm her scientific curiosity. "I came to find you," she said, knowing the creature couldn't understand her words, but hoping it might sense her non-threatening intent. "To prove you exist when everyone said you couldn't." The halite shifted, its crystalline structure flowing into a new configuration. The electromagnetic readings changed again, becoming remarkably similar to the patterns generated by her own equipment, as if it were mimicking her technology. "You're learning," she realized, "adapting to my presence, my methods of communication." Over the next hours, Mara documented the halite's behavior, noting its responses to different stimuli and its apparent ability to communicate through electromagnetic pulses. Most astonishing was its demonstration of problem-solving capabilities, when she created simple puzzles using her equipment. The creature devised solutions that suggested intelligence far beyond instinctive behavior. Her scheduled communication with Gamma-7 was due, but Mara hesitated. This discovery was too important, too revolutionary to risk being dismissed as equipment malfunction or hallucination. She needed to bring the evidence directly to the orbital station, to force her colleagues to acknowledge what she'd found. A plan formed in her mind, audacious, potentially dangerous but necessary. "Change of plans," she transmitted to Gamma-7. "Requesting immediate extraction. Have discovered compelling evidence that requires orbital laboratory analysis." "Acknowledged. Dr. Kowalski," came the reply, tinged with both relief and smugness. "Prepare for retrieval in 3 hours." Mara turned to the halite, which remained near her shuttle, its sensory apparatus continuously sampling her equipment. "We're going on a trip," she told it, beginning to modify her electromagnetic pulse generator to create a specific pattern, one she hoped would convey her intentions. "I need you to follow me." The ascent vehicle arrived precisely on schedule, an automated transport designed to return surface explorers to the orbital station. As it landed, Mara loaded her samples and equipment, continuously monitoring the electromagnetic signals from the halite, which had retreated to a distance but remained present, according to her instruments. Just before boarding, She activated her modified pulse generator, broadcasting a complex pattern she'd designed based on her interactions with the creature, effectively an invitation. Then, she boarded the ascent vehicle and initiated launch sequence. As the craft rose from the surface, Mara monitored her instruments with increasing excitement. The electromagnetic signature of the halite was moving, pacing the ascent vehicle, gradually accelerating to match its velocity. Somehow, the creature was following her into the upper atmosphere, defying conventional understanding of both its physical capabilities and biological requirements. Approaching Gamma-7 docking coordinates, announced the craft's AI. Station sensors detect unusual electromagnetic activity in our vicinity. Please advise. Normal instrument functionality, Mira replied, suppressing a smile. Continue docking procedure. The research station grew larger in the viewport, a sprawling collection of modules orbiting high above Kepler 442c's salt plains. Mara could imagine the team of xenobiologists preparing to receive her samples, already formulating explanations to discount her findings. They would have no such luxury this time. The docking procedure completed with mechanical precision. As the airlock cycled, Mara gathered her most important samples and data storage devices. The station's internal sensors would be detecting the electromagnetic anomaly accompanying her vessel, but the science team would attribute it to instrument malfunction or atmospheric interference, at least initially. The inner door opened to reveal Dr. Vexarian, Dr. Thrum, and 3 other researchers waiting in the reception area. Their expressions ranged from professional courtesy to barely concealed impatience. Dr. Kowalski, Vexarian began, his cranial ridges pulsing with skeptical hues. We've reviewed your transmitted data. While interesting, we find no compelling evidence to support biological activity. The electromagnetic patterns are consistent with known geomagnetic phenomena exacerbated by ionic storms. Mira smiled. I brought more definitive evidence. She activated a handheld display, showing real-time electromagnetic readings from outside the station. The patterns were unmistakable, structured, complex, and currently surrounding the docking module. What am I looking at? Vexarian asked, his tone dismissive despite the unusual readings. The apex predator of Kepler 442c's salt plains, Mara replied calmly. A creature we've been unable to detect because it exists partially out of phase with our standard observational spectrum. It manipulates electromagnetic fields to conceal itself, to communicate, and to hunt. Preposterous, one of the junior researchers muttered. Dr. Thrum moved closer to the display, his breathing chambers pulsating with increased frequency. These patterns, they're similar to synaptic firing sequences in complex neural networks. Precisely, Mara confirmed. What you're seeing is thought, or something analogous to it. The creature is intelligent, adaptive, and currently positioned directly outside this module. As if responding to her words, the electromagnetic patterns intensified. The station's proximity alarms activated, warning of an unidentified mass near the hull. Yet the external cameras showed nothing but empty space and the distant salt plains below. Station sensors indicate a mass anomaly, announced the facility AI. But visual confirmation is negative. Recommend immediate security protocols. Dr. Vexarian moved to a control panel, bringing up additional sensor readings. His expression shifted from dismissal to confusion as the data confirmed an invisible presence, something massive clinging to the station's exterior. This is impossible, he whispered, his academic certainty crumbling in the face of undeniable evidence. Actually, Mara replied, it's merely improbable. The creature, I call it a halite, exists in a state that our conventional detection methods weren't calibrated to observe. It's been there all along, evolving in an environment we dismissed as lifeless because we were looking for the wrong signs of life. She connected her data storage device to the station's main laboratory system, displaying the microscopic structures she discovered in the salt samples. The microorganisms exist in a crystalline matrix that uses temperature differentials and ionic exchange to generate energy. Effectively, a biological battery adapted for hypersaline conditions. They form the foundation of an ecosystem that culminates in the halite, a creature that has evolved to manipulate electromagnetic fields as its primary means of interaction with its environment. The science team gathered around her displays, their skepticism giving way to stunned fascination as they reviewed her findings. The evidence was overwhelming. Cellular structures unlike any previously documented, energy exchange mechanisms that defied conventional biochemistry, and most compelling, the massive entity now residing outside their station. If this is true, Dr. Vexarian said slowly, it represents a complete paradigm shift in xenobiology. We would need to reconsider every supposedly barren world we've surveyed. That's exactly my point, Mara agreed. Our definition of life has been too narrow, too constrained by our own biological frameworks. There could be countless worlds teeming with life we've simply failed to recognize. Dr. Thrum, who had been reviewing the microscopic imagery with particular interest, looked up with his multifaceted eyes, displaying the Delphinus equivalent of amazement. These structures, they're reminiscent of ancient crystalline formations documented in the deep archives of my species. Legends speak of crystal entities that could think and communicate, though such accounts were dismissed as pre-scientific mythology. Perhaps, Mara suggested, your ancestors encountered similar life forms before developing the technology to properly document them. The station shuddered slightly as the halite adjusted its position outside, its massive form still invisible to conventional observation, but undeniably present according to the sensor readings. It appears to be waiting, Dr. Thrum noted, studying the electromagnetic patterns. The signals have stabilized into a repeating sequence. Mara nodded. I believe it's curious about us, about this facility and the beings inside. It followed me here because I established communication, however rudimentary. It recognizes us as something other than its environment. Dr. Vexarian, despite his initial skepticism, had transitioned to scientific curiosity. If it's as intelligent as you suggest, we have an ethical obligation to respond. The Interplanetary Council protocols for first contact with sentient species are clear. Which is why I brought it here, Mara explained. A single human's observations would be dismissed, but the combined testimony of Gamma 7's multi-species research team carries weight with the Council. The next several hours were a flurry of activity as the science team documented the halite's presence, analyzed Mara's samples, and prepared preliminary reports for the Interplanetary Council. Additional detection equipment was hastily calibrated to observe the creature, gradually building a more complete picture of its physical structure and capabilities. What emerged was astonishing. A life form that existed simultaneously as solid matter and as an electromagnetic field matrix, capable of shifting between states as needed. The halite could literally dissolve portions of itself into the salt substrate, dispersing its consciousness across a distributed network before reforming at will. This explained how it had evaded detection for so long, and how it could survive in an environment previously thought hostile to all life. More remarkable still was evidence of a complex society. As the team refined their detection methods, they began to observe multiple electromagnetic signatures across the planet's surface, smaller entities similar to the halite, but with distinct frequency signatures that suggested individuality. They're everywhere, whispered one researcher. Watching the planetary scan revealed dozens, then hundreds of signatures. An entire civilization right beneath our instruments. Dr. Vexarian, fully converted from skeptic to advocate, was already drafting communication protocols. We need to establish formal contact parameters, develop translation matrices, prepare cultural exchange frameworks. We should proceed cautiously, Mara advised. We know almost nothing about their social structures, or how they might interpret our attempts at communication. Agreed, Dr. Thrum resonated. But we cannot ignore this discovery. It challenges the fundamental assumptions of our scientific understanding. Outside the station, the halite remained, a patient sentinel waiting for further interaction. Its electromagnetic patterns had stabilized into what the team now recognized as a passive observational mode, gathering information without actively attempting communication. In the station's conference room, representatives from each species present on Gamma-7 gathered to discuss implications and next steps. The atmosphere was electric with scientific excitement and philosophical reconsideration. The Interplanetary Council will require comprehensive evidence before reclassifying Kepler 442c, noted the Vosgian delegate, her feathered crest vibrating with cautious optimism. This discovery contradicts 3 centuries of established xenobiological doctrine. Evidence we now have in abundance, Dr. Vexarian countered, his earlier skepticism completely reversed. Dr. Kowalski's findings are unimpeachable, and the creature's presence is continuously monitored by station sensors. There's something more profound at stake than reclassification, Mara interjected. This discovery should humble us. How many worlds have we dismissed as lifeless because we lacked the imagination to recognize unfamiliar forms of life? How many potential civilizations have we overlooked because they didn't conform to our narrow definitions? The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Centuries of interstellar exploration might need re-evaluation. Countless survey reports re-examined with new detection parameters. We must acknowledge, Dr. Thrum finally said, his resonant voice carrying the weight of philosophical consideration, that our scientific consensus was built upon incomplete observation. We confused the limits of our perception with the limits of possibility. Outside the conference room, in the observation deck facing Kepler 442c, a junior researcher monitored the halite's electromagnetic patterns. The creature had shifted position, moving to align with the station's rotational axis, a change that brought it directly opposite the observation windows. Dr. Kowalski, the researcher called, I think it's trying to establish visual contact. Mara excused herself from the conference and joined the researcher at the window. The space beyond appeared empty to naked eye observation, but the sensor displays clearly showed the massive creature positioned just meters from the reinforced glass. It's learning, Mara observed. It recognized the observation windows as significant and positioned itself accordingly. She activated her electromagnetic pulse generator, modifying it to interface with the station's more powerful communications array. Carefully, she composed a sequence based on mathematical constants, universal concepts that might bridge the gap between radically different forms of consciousness. The response came almost immediately, a perfect repetition of her sequence followed by an original pattern that maintained the mathematical relationship. It was unmistakably communication. It understands, she whispered. Word spread quickly through the station. Researchers abandoned ongoing projects to witness the historic exchange, crowding the observation deck as Mara and the halite established increasingly complex communication patterns. Within hours, they had progressed from mathematical concepts to basic spatial relationships, building a rudimentary, shared language. This is unprecedented, Dr. Vexarian admitted, watching the exchange with undisguised wonder. Not even the silicon-based intelligences of Tau Ceti exhibited such rapid adaptation to cross-species communication. Because it evolved to communicate through electromagnetic fields, Mara explained. Our technology operates on principles familiar to its sensory apparatus. In a sense, we've been speaking versions of its language since we first developed electronic communication. As the initial excitement settled into methodical scientific documentation, Mara found herself standing alone at the observation window during a scheduled rest period. The halite remained outside, its electromagnetic patterns in a state the team had come to recognize as passive observation, the creature's equivalent of contemplation. "You've changed everything," she said softly to the invisible presence. "Not just our understanding of this planet, but our conception of life itself." The creature's patterns shifted slightly, as if acknowledging her words despite not understanding their specific meaning. Dr. Thrum joined her at the window, his breathing chambers cycling in the measured rhythm that indicated reflective thought among his species. "The council representatives have arrived in system," he informed her. "They will dock within 20 standard hours to evaluate our findings and establish official first contact protocols." Mara nodded, her gaze still fixed on the empty space where sensors confirmed the halite waited. "And Dr. Vixarian? Has he completed his reassessment?" "Indeed." Thrum's voice carried harmonics of amusement. "He has rewritten his entire xenobiological framework to accommodate your discovery. Quite the intellectual reversal." "It wasn't about being right," Mara said quietly. "It was about being open to possibilities beyond our established understanding. A lesson many species learn repeatedly throughout their scientific development." Thrum observed. "We build models to explain our observations, then mistake the models for reality itself. Until something comes along that doesn't fit the model," Mara agreed. Together, they watched as the halite's electromagnetic signature changed, expanding outward before contracting into a more concentrated form. According to the sensors, more of the creatures were gathering in the salt plains below, their signatures forming complex geometric arrangements visible only through specialized detection equipment. "They're organizing," Thrum noted with fascination. "Preparing for formal contact, perhaps. Or simply curious about the sudden attention from above," Mara suggested. "We've been observing this planet for centuries, without recognizing their existence. Our sudden awareness must represent a significant change from their perspective." The following day brought the arrival of the Interplanetary Council delegation, representatives from 12 founding species who would evaluate the discovery and establish official protocols for interacting with the newly recognized life forms. The delegation included specialists in xenobiology, communication theory, and first contact ethics. In the station's main assembly chamber, Mara presented her findings with Dr. Vixarian and Dr. Thrum, providing supporting analysis. The evidence was comprehensive and compelling. Microscopic structures demonstrating biological processes, electromagnetic patterns exhibiting clear signs of intelligence, and most persuasively, the continuing presence of the halite outside the station. The implications extend far beyond Kepler 442c. Mara concluded her presentation. "We must reconsider every planetary survey conducted using our previous detection parameters. Countless worlds classified as lifeless may host thriving ecosystems operating on principles we fail to recognize." The Council representatives deliberated briefly before reaching a unanimous decision. Kepler 442c would be immediately reclassified as a living world harboring intelligent life, with all the protections and research protocols such designation entailed. "Furthermore," announced the Arcturian representative, her crystalline appendages glimmering with formal authority, "we recognize the significant contribution of Dr. Mara Kowalski in expanding our understanding of potential life forms. Your willingness to challenge established doctrine exemplifies the highest principles of scientific inquiry." The acknowledgement was gratifying, but Mara found herself more concerned with practical matters. What protocols will govern our continued interaction with the halites? They represent an entirely new category of intelligence, with sensory and communication modalities unlike any previously documented species. "A specialized research team will be assembled," the representative assured her. "Your participation would be most valuable, given your unique rapport with these entities." Outside the station, the halite continued its patient vigil, joined now by several smaller entities that orbited at varying distances, a gathering that the science team interpreted as significant social behavior. The electromagnetic patterns between these entities suggested complex information exchange. perhaps discussions about the strange orbital structure and its inhabitants. In the weeks that followed, a formal first contact protocol was established. Using increasingly sophisticated electromagnetic interfaces, the research team began building a shared communication framework with the halites. Progress was rapid, aided by the creature's remarkable adaptability and apparent eagerness to exchange information. Several key discoveries emerged from these exchanges. The halites revealed themselves to be ancient, their civilization predating humanity's earliest ancestors. They experienced time differently, their crystalline biology allowing individual lifespans measured in thousands of years. Most significantly, they possessed a form of distributed consciousness, able to disperse their awareness throughout the salt substrate and reconstitute it at will, a concept challenging to translate into conventional biological terms. For Mara, the most profound revelation came during a specialized communication session. Using an advanced interface that translated electromagnetic patterns into conceptual imagery, she asked the primary halite, now designated First Contact Entity, about its initial response to her presence on the planet's surface. The answer came as a complex electromagnetic sequence that the interface rendered as recognition of other, long-awaited event, completion of cycle. "You were expecting us?" Mara asked. Her question translated into corresponding electromagnetic patterns. The response: awareness of skywatchers, 300 cycles of observation, patience until correct perception achieved. The implication was staggering. The halites had been aware of the orbital research station and previous survey missions. They had observed humanity's repeated failure to recognize their existence, waiting patiently until someone developed the perception necessary to see beyond conventional detection methods. "Why didn't you try to communicate with earlier missions?" Mara asked. Different perception frameworks. Communication requires shared conceptual foundation. You changed your seeing. Dr. Thrum, monitoring the exchange, emitted the harmonic pattern that signified profound realization among his species. They couldn't communicate until someone was prepared to recognize their existence. Perception preceded communication. "They were there all along," Mara whispered, "waiting for us to expand our understanding enough to see them." The discovery transformed scientific approaches across multiple disciplines. Survey teams throughout explored space began re-evaluating supposedly barren worlds using new detection parameters. Within months, similar life forms were discovered on 3 previously classified dead planets, each exhibiting unique adaptations to extreme environments once thought hostile to all life. 6 months after her initial landing on Kepler 442c, Mara stood in the observation deck, watching the halites perform what cultural specialists now recognized as a form of astronomical observation. The creatures arranged themselves in precise geometric patterns that mimicked the relative positions of nearby star systems, a living star map constantly updated as stellar positions changed. Dr. Vexarian joined her, his earlier skepticism long replaced by genuine intellectual humility. "The Interplanetary Council has formally adopted your detection protocols as standard procedure for all planetary surveys," he informed her. 17 worlds previously classified as lifeless have shown evidence of non-conventional biological activity under the new parameters. "It's just the beginning," Mara replied. "We've spent centuries looking for reflections of ourselves in the cosmos, missing the endless variations life can assume. How many more forms remain undiscovered because we lack the perspective to recognize them?" Outside the window, the first contact entity approached the station, its massive crystalline form now partially visible thanks to specialized viewing equipment that translated its electromagnetic presence into visual representation. The creature extended sensory appendages toward the observation deck in what the research team had come to recognize as a greeting gesture. Mara activated the communication interface, sending a pattern that conveyed recognition and respect. The response came immediately, a complex sequence that the interface translated with increasing sophistication. Gratitude for new perception. Exchange of knowledge continues. Universal understanding expands. The universe is vaster than any theory, Mara said, addressing both her colleague and the intelligent entity beyond the glass. This is only the beginning of what we might discover if we remain open to possibilities beyond our expectations. As if in response, the halite's electromagnetic field pulsed in a pattern the researchers had come to associate with affirmation. Below, on the planet's surface, visible only through specialized sensors, thousands of smaller entities arranged themselves in complex, flowing patterns. A civilization revealed after centuries of invisible existence, now acknowledged, communicating, and reaching outward to engage with the broader cosmic community. In that moment, Mara understood that her discovery had not merely identified a new form of life, but had fundamentally expanded humanity's conception of what life could be. The boundaries between living and non-living, between intelligence and environment, between perception and reality, all had been revealed as more permeable, more fluid than previously imagined. The salt fields of Kepler 442c, once dismissed as sterile wasteland, now represented the frontier of a new scientific understanding, one that approached the universe with humility rather than presumption, with openness rather than rigid categorization. And somewhere in the crystalline consciousness of the halites was encoded a patience that humans could scarcely comprehend. The willingness to wait centuries for another intelligence to develop the perception necessary to recognize their existence. "This changes everything," Dr. Vixarian said softly. Mara nodded, watching as more halites gathered around the first contact entity, their electromagnetic patterns synchronizing in what researchers theorized might be their equivalent of communal thought. "No," she replied. "It reminds us that everything always changes. We just need the courage to see it."